And now, stand-up community subscribers and listeners from around the globe, it's time to Stand Up with Pete Dominic, where we ask the important questions that impact you, your family, and your community. Such as, could I lobby the Weight Watchers app team to take cream puffs off the red list? And with the Beijing Olympics underway, despite the risk of COVID variants, is it past time to see some exhilarating Olympic-level bubble soccer? And now, the podcast host whose fashionable ski suit is the envy of all insect protopod larvae, Pete Dominic!
Yes, indeed. Right again, sir. Why is my ski outfit the envy? I don't understand that. But I'm happy that my outfit is the envy of somebody, because we did go skiing on Tuesday. Girls pulled them right out of school. You're skipping school. You're playing hooky. You're out of there. We're going skiing. Skiing with Pop. Me. And Ava and Julia and I went to Hunter Mountain, where I have built so many memories with my family. My dad was a ski instructor there for over 10 years, and we had an awesome day. It was sunny. The girls skied awesome. I obviously skied awesome because I'm really, really good at it. Nobody fell. Nobody had any issues. We had a beautiful day. We had a lot of laps. We really enjoyed ourselves, and it was a good trip up and back. Thank you for supporting me here on this podcast that allows me to do things like that with my girls whenever the opportunity arises. You know, you could just be spontaneous, and I really love that. So I did a whole bunch of interviews on Monday, and I'm very happy to share two awesome conversations, super relevant, both of them with you today. I've got Jonathan Greenblatt, who you might have heard in the news in the last couple of days, reacting to the women on The View, Whoopi Goldberg's comments, as well as, I mean, every day there's anti-Semitism, unfortunately, in this country. I was talking about it on the news yesterday here on Stand Up. Jonathan Greenblatt is an old friend of mine. We met years ago at the Aspen Ideas Fest. He joined me several times at SiriusXM. I think this is the first, maybe it's the second time he's on the podcast. Either way, it's a great conversation. He has a very important new book out, just came out this month, which we talk about, and I think you're going to love that. And before that, I've got a conversation with David Rothkopf, who is a foreign policy expert. He worked in the Obama administration. He is a columnist at the Daily Beast. He's epic. He's prolific on Twitter. He's the host of Deep State Radio, the podcast, and the founder of the Rothkopf Group. He's got his hands in a whole bunch of things. He's a super smart guy. We talked about Putin, Ukraine, and Russia, and it was surprisingly hilarious because of Rothkopf's got a little bit of an eccentric kind of personality, at least in this interview, and the way that it starts is awkward and probably one of the most hilarious moments in the podcast. So you're not going to want to miss that conversation for those reasons as well. I've got Jonathan Greenblatt and Dave Rothkopf because Stand Up with Pete Dominic is a big deal. And I love Jewish men, okay? Deal with it. And I can't do it without your support. So, folks, let's do it. Time for the news. Time for the last 24. And speaking of Whoopi Goldberg in the news, I'm just seeing this. I'm going to just warn you, this is not going to be the most robust, comprehensive, because usually I pay attention to the news all day to kind of discern editorially what are the most important stories and grabbing clips. But today I was skiing, so I'm just grabbing some random shit here. But I'm seeing that apparently ABC has suspended Whoopi Goldberg from The View for 2 weeks. ABC News President Kim Goldwyn apparently asked Whoopi Goldberg to take some time off to, quote, reflect on her remarks. She's apparently, Goldwyn, that is, added the network is standing in solidarity with our Jewish colleagues, friends, family, and communities. And so Whoopi Goldberg did post a full-throated apology about the ignorance of her own comment. And I frankly thought that was more than enough. I thought her apology was helpful. And she actually, on The View yesterday, gave a full-throated apology as well. Here's that.
Today on our show, I misspoke. And I tweeted about it last night, but I kind of want you to hear it from me directly. I said something that I feel a responsibility for not leaving unexamined because my words upset so many people, which was never my intention. And I understand why now. And for that, I am deeply, deeply grateful because the information I got was really helpful and helped me understand some different things. And while discussing how a Tennessee school board unanimously voted to remove a graphic novel about the Holocaust, I said that the Holocaust wasn't about race, and it was instead about man's inhumanity to man. But it is indeed about race, because Hitler and the Nazis considered Jews to be an inferior race. Now, words matter, and mine are no exception. I regret my comments, as I said, and I stand corrected. I also stand with the Jewish people, as they know.
Do they? I guess not. Well, at least the suits at ABC didn't think so. My guest today, Jonathan Greenblatt, the CEO of the Anti-Defamation League, then joined The View, where he called on ABC to add a Jewish co-host. I want to play that for you, but I just want to be clear. I talked to Jonathan Monday about his book and about just general hate and the rise of hate and anti-Semitism in America. And while we were talking, I think The View was on, actually, and that's when this happened. So just kind of a coincidence that he's on the show and a major part of the news. But I love Jonathan Greenblatt so much that I want to include this whole 2-minute and 20 clip from The View. And just to set it up, this is Sunny Hostin, who's one of the co-hosts. She is, of course, a black woman, in case you didn't know. And then Whoopi Goldberg is also there on panel with like 5 of the other women on The View. So it gets a little awkward here at the end when Greenblatt suggests maybe they should get a Jewish co-host. But all of this is worth hearing, as well as the interview that I do with him. Here he is yesterday on The View with Sunny Hostin.
It's been a long time, and I love when we get to work together. Talking about Mouse, according to a 2020 study by the Claims Conference, 63% of millennials and Gen Z surveyed did not know that 6 million Jews were killed during the Holocaust. And yesterday, our discussion, as you mentioned, was about how the McMinn County School Board in Tennessee is now denying students the right to study a book like Mouse, a Pulitzer Prize-winning book on the Holocaust. How are we going to educate the next generation of young people when Holocaust education is being taken out of schools and is just under attack?
Well, I'm so glad you asked this question, because it seems like school boards are war zones in this moment, with sides, with the left and the right fighting like you wouldn't believe. And I get it. I think parents should be engaged. I think school boards should be engaged in what we teach our kids. But there should be some hard and fast principles, like the facts. And the Holocaust happened, and we need to learn from this genocide if we want to prevent future tragedies from happening, just like we need to learn about American history, et cetera. And the data, as you said, doesn't lie. The idea that in the UK, there was a recent study that reflected that 1/3 of the people believe that 6 million Jews weren't killed in the Holocaust. I mean, it's just 70 years ago. And so I do think we have found at the ADL that you can't stop hate by arresting people. You can't stop hate by litigating. You got to change hearts and minds. And Holocaust education has a proven impact in reducing levels of intolerance, in improving the way people see pluralism. So it is very important, this education. It's got to happen in the classroom, but I would dare say shows like yours are so important. And I know you guys believe in representation, and I know you guys work to bring all points of view. And hey, I know you're considering, a new host for the show, a permanent host. Think about having a Jewish host on this show who can bring these issues of anti-Semitism, who can bring these issues of representation to The View every single day.
I guess I don't count because everybody thinks I'm Jewish, but I'm not. So maybe you're right.
Joy Behar filling in the awkward space there. I love Joy. Love me some Joy Behar. Okay, well, Whoopi Goldberg has been suspended. You heard from Jonathan Greenblatt there, and I guess that's all I have to say about that until we come back to the issue when Jonathan joins me coming up right here on Stand Up. You're going to love that conversation. And let's jump around a little bit. Some more audio for you here in the last 24. I thought this was interesting. Yesterday on CNN, Jake Tapper on his show The Lead announced that CNN is going to cover the horrible human rights abuses committed by the Chinese government during this month's 2022 Winter Olympics in Beijing. The Olympics, of course, officially begin this week, the 4th. And on the lead Monday, Tapper announced that he's going to spend a portion of each show during the covering on the atrocities being committed by Beijing with a new segment called Behind China's Wall. Here he is talking about it.
And ahead of the start of the Beijing Winter Olympics later this week, it officially kicks off Friday. We're going to start a new series here at The Lead. It's called Behind China's Wall, because behind the fanfare and the glamour of the upcoming Olympic Games are a lot of ugly truths that the Chinese government wants you to ignore.
Well, good on my friends over at CNN for doing that. I think that's a really good idea. They should cover America's human rights abuses as well while they're at it. Well, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell said on Tuesday that individuals who have pleaded guilty to crimes connected to the January 6th Capitol attack should not have their sentences reduced, which puts him squarely at odds with former President Donald Trump, who at a rally on Saturday said, you know what, listen, if I'm president, then all of those people, good people, doing nothing but carrying roses and doing nothing but writing poetry and singing songs, peace songs. They were peaceful people. If it requires pardons, I'll give them pardons if I'm elected. They were treated so unfairly. Anyway, here is Mitch McConnell being asked about it.
How concerned are you about the former president offering pardons to people who attacked the Capitol on January 6th? And because of his comments, does he have the moral authority to be president again?
What we saw here on January the 6th was an effort to prevent the peaceful transfer of power from one administration to another, which had never happened before in our country. My view is I would not be in favor of shortening any of the sentences for any of the people who pleaded guilty to crimes.
Also yesterday, during his press availabilities, Mitch McConnell was asked a really important and great question from a reporter who's getting a ton of credit from other credible journalists, a guy named Pablo Manriquez gained a whole bunch of new followers. He's a journalist with an outlet called Latino Rebels. And he asked this brave and important question to the Senate Minority Leader, who will have a lot to do with confirming President Biden's new black female Supreme Court justice.
How many black women do you have on staff, and how are they informing your decision to move forward with the SCOTUS nomination? And the same question to the other senators.
How many what?
How many black women do you have on your staff, and are they informing your decision on how to move forward with the SCOTUS nomination? And same question to the other senators. Sorry. How many black women do you have on staff, and how are they informing your decision to move forward with the SCOTUS? How many black women do you have on staff, and how are they informing your decision to move forward with the SCOTUS nomination?
Actually, I haven't checked. We don't have a racial quota in my office, but I've had a number of African-American employees, both male and female, over the years in all kinds of different positions, including speechwriter.
Oh, well, he's had a black speechwriter. There you go. You got you, Pablo, with that question. I haven't checked. I haven't checked. I don't know. I don't look at the, I don't know what color people are on my staff. I don't really think about that. I mean, I think, generally speaking, you should make a conscious effort to have a diverse group of people working for you at every single job that you can. It's not as easy in certain places, in certain jobs, in certain industries. But if you can have a group of diverse people working for you in general, I think you're probably going to be more successful in almost every way. I don't know. What do I know? What am I talking about? I work alone in a shed, but I would love to have someone working for me that isn't necessarily a young, balding white man. Although I'm not opposed to it, I'm just saying. Well, President Biden did lay out his criteria for his SCOTUS nominee yesterday. He said he intended to make his decision by the end of the month. Here's a little bit of that with a roaring fire in the Oval Office, by the way. I like that.
What I'm looking for is a candidate with character, with the qualities of a judge in terms of being courteous to the folks before them and treating people with respect, as well as a judicial philosophy that is more one that suggests that there are unenumerated rights in the Constitution, and all the amendments mean something, including the Ninth Amendment. And but I intend to make this decision, and get it to my colleagues by the end of the month. That's my hope. and I'm looking forward to their advice and how to proceed and how the hearings will be conducted and the like. So.
I mean, did you hear that fire crackling while he's describing his SCOTUS nominee? I like that. Okay, what else do I have for you? Here is Jen Psaki talking about this in the White House briefing yesterday.
How do you respond specifically to Ted Cruz, who overnight called it offensive and defensive to black women that didn't make that pledge?
Well, here's what I would say first. Just over a year ago, the previous president also promised to select a woman for the Supreme Court. Not only were there no complaints about choosing a nominee from a specific demographic from the same corners, but there was widespread praise of now Justice Barrett on those grounds, with Republican lawmakers widely highlighting that they thought this was positive for women in America. So take Senator Cruz himself. He had no objection to Donald Trump promising he'd nominate a woman in 2020. Repeat, no objection at all. In fact, he praised her on these grounds. The nominee. During her confirmation hearing, Senator Cruz said, quote, "I think you're an amazing role model for little girls. What advice would you give little girls?" When President Reagan honored his campaign pledge to place the first woman on the court, he said it symbolized the unique American opportunity. There is no outcry around that.
Well, Jen Psaki came prepared for that question in yesterday's briefing. And listen to this story about the truckers and protesters against COVID-19 mandates that blocked the Canadian border crossing yesterday. This is CNN's Paula Newton reporting from Ottawa.
Protesters from Canada's so-called Freedom Convoy are imposing a lockdown of their own. Ottawa, the country's capital, gridlocked. For days now, hundreds of rigs and cars lining city streets, with protesters camped out in front of Parliament and beyond. With passion and anger, they are demanding vaccine and mask mandates be dropped and life return to pre-pandemic normal. They say they're not budging until that happens.
I'm staying. I'm not leaving until the mandates are gone.
This convoy is all about freedom. It's not only with the truck drivers, it's actually for every single person. You, me, buddy down the road, it doesn't matter. It's all about your free choice.
This started as a cross-country truckers' protest by those against vaccine mandates imposed in January in both Canada and by the Biden administration. But it gained a following from a vocal minority of Canadians fed up with COVID restrictions.
We should not be mandated to take vaccines. Any medical vaccine, whatever, it should be a personal choice.
That kind of sentiment gave way to this standoff now in Ottawa.
There's a small minority that feel that they can, shut down a city or try to take over a government. It's just a bit bizarre, to put it mildly.
While police said protests have been largely peaceful, there have been a handful of disturbing displays of hate symbols, incidents of vandalism and harassment.
Get out of here! We don't want you here!
People stomping on the nation's war memorial, reports of retail workers and residents being harassed, even at a soup kitchen. Ottawa police say they are investigating the incidents. Mr. Justin Trudeau says he's shocked and disgusted.
I want to be very clear. We are not intimidated by those who hurl insults and abuse at small business workers and steal food from the homeless. We won't give in to those who fly racist flags. We won't cave to those who engage in vandalism or dishonor the memory of our veterans.
All right. Well, I wanted to borrow that reporting from CNN because I thought they just did a great job giving all sides in that situation. And great comments from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who himself and I think a couple of his other family members have COVID right now. But he wasn't going to let that happen without making a powerful statement in that case. If you know what's going on up there, if you're paying attention to that, I'd love to hear the Canadian perspective. I was talking to a Canadian yesterday. Actually, she'll be on the show tomorrow. Really amazing scientist, virologist, Dr. Angela Rasmussen, who's actually American and now living in Canada. But she was giving me an interesting perspective on Canada. We had a great conversation. That will post tomorrow. She is really smart, and I'm super psyched to have finally gotten her on the show. Well, that's all the sound I've got for you today. I do want to give you some more headlines, though. It's time for the news dump.
Golden Corral is out of steak, infuriating chumps. They took it out with their fists on today's news dump.
Oh, yeah, this is a terrible story coming out of Philadelphia where there's a shortage of steak at the Golden Corral, and two parties were involved. One family cut in front of another family. They were taking their time. They ran out of steak and got into a very apparently heated exchange, and I just watched the video. It's awful. Awful fight. They're throwing chairs and shit at each other. Oh, God, just terrible. Everything's caught on video now forever, too. Wild fight at the Golden Corral. Hey, at least it wasn't at the Cracker Barrel. All right, well, lots of other news to report here in the news dump. Iran nuclear talks are nearing resolution or a nuclear crisis, according to the U.S. While President Joe Biden working to address the crisis over Russia menacing Ukraine, there's another critical one looming, with a senior State Department official telling reporters the end game is just weeks away, because the nuclear talks are scheduled to resume this week for their 9th round, with the U.S. and Iran still negotiating indirectly about both countries returning to the Obama-era nuclear deal that's in tatters. So that's certainly a story to watch. And speaking of Russia and Ukraine, here are a couple of headlines. U.S. and Russia agree to keep talking amid Ukraine crisis, but Putin claiming his concerns are ignored. The Russian leader spoke shortly after top U.S.-Russian diplomats held a call. And as far as the Ukraine, I said the Ukraine, you're not supposed to say that. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky on Tuesday signed a decree that increases the country's armed forces by 100,000 troops, along with increasing pay for troops over 3 years. So overall, the armed forces comprise about 250,000 troops, while Russia has around 900,000. But they're bolstering their preparations in Ukraine, and they're working alongside Poland and Britain, and it's really imminent and crazy what is happening over there. Hopefully nothing happens. Amazing what it would be if not a shot were fired. I'm talking with Dave Rothkopf about it coming up. A lecturer has been suspended after comments about President Biden's Supreme Court selection. His name is Ilya Shapiro. He's a Georgetown law professor, senior lecturer, and now he's been suspended over his tweets criticizing President Joe Biden's promise to nominate a black woman to the Supreme Court. In a tweet posted last week that's since been deleted, the incoming executive director of the Center for Constitution and senior lecturer at Georgetown University Law Center said Biden will be nominating not the objectively best pick, but a lesser, quote, lesser black woman to replace Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer, who will be retiring at the end of the current term. That got him into a bit of hot water, as you can imagine. And good news for Native American tribes who have agreed to a $590 million settlement with Johnson & Johnson drug distributors over the opioid epidemic. Tribes were disproportionately affected by the opioid epidemic, and now they have made a settlement for almost $600 million. Really important story, one that I'm definitely going to be following up on with a guest. Now, millions are at risk of drought as the drought threatens the Horn of Africa. Millions of people in the region, Somalia, Kenya, now Ethiopia, raising alarm about the latest climate shock to a fragile region traversed by herders and others trying to keep their animals and themselves alive. Another important story to pay attention to. And terrible news out of Minnesota, where two were shot, one fatally at a school in Minnesota, Richfield, Minnesota. Police said the shooter left the scene and remains at large as of Tuesday night. The governor, Tim Walz, tweeted on Tuesday afternoon that he was being briefed on the situation by the FBI in Minneapolis and expressed, of course, his condolences to the family, friends, and victims of South Education School District, South Education Center. Wow, just terrible to hear this out of Minnesota and any school. North Carolina fertilizer plant forces thousands to evacuate. What's this? Winston-Salem fire chief said in a press conference that a 1-mile evacuation zone had been implemented at least Wednesday due to the potential of an explosion. They don't want this fertilizer plant to explode. Near than 6,000 people had to evacuate due to the 600 tons of ammonium nitrate at the plant. So they're just gonna leave that alone, let it calm down, and then they'll go back to work. Huge winter storm. Apparently, it's going to stretch over 2,000 miles. Second winter storm, less than a week, sets up to cross the country. 21 states gearing up for a blast of winter precipitation and dangerously cold temperatures. More than 90 million people are currently under winter weather alerts stretching from the Rockies to New England. And finally, this is a good story. A comic book store owners are offering to ship banned graphic novel about the Holocaust that we've been hearing so much about, Mouse, to Tennessee students for free after a Tennessee school board banned the graphic novel about the Holocaust from local middle schools. Comic book store owners from near and far pledged to send students the book for free. The Pulitzer Prize-winning graphic novel Mouse was banned after a unanimous vote at the McKean County, Tennessee Board of Education, and those bans are coming to a Board of Education near you, maybe yours, so we all got to wake up, get involved. But good news, that's backfiring, I think. All right, well, that is your news dump brought to you by Truebill, truebill.com/standup right now. You want to save thousands, hundreds, maybe thousands of dollars on subscriptions that you signed up for that you forgot about. Everybody's doing it. Go to truebill.com/standup right now. And very excited to bring you my first guest. Well, coming up, I should say, the head of the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, and author of the new book, It Could Happen Here, Jonathan Greenblatt, joins me. We had a great conversation, as I told you about earlier. But first, I'm very happy to have Dave Rothkopf back on the show because, and by the way, I think it was Tina Winsett who suggested I have Dave on to talk about his most recent article at the Daily Beast and much, much more. Dave is a foreign policy expert. He's a contributor and columnist at the Daily Beast. He's on the board of contributors to USA Today, founder of the Rothkopf Group, host of Deep State Radio. He's got a new book called Traitor, and so much more. He does a whole bunch of stuff, and I'm really excited to have him back on the show. We talked mostly about his article in the Daily Beast about the situation on the border there, Ukraine and Russia. But the way that this interview just starts, I just left this on. I mean, I was pressing, I usually record the top just to get the levels right, and it was just so, I don't know Dave that well at all. He doesn't know me that well at all, so I don't really know his sense of humor, his personality. I think I've only interviewed him a couple times before. And so it just, the way that this starts and what he says to kind of get the laugh and break the ice, I love this. I think you're going to as well. And let him know that you heard him here on the show. He's got a huge following on Twitter, so that'll be super helpful for your pal Pete and this podcast that you love so much. DJ Rothkopf is his Twitter handle, DJ ROTHKOPF, which is a fun name to say, and that's how we start. Let's do it. Rothkopf.
That's me.
You're moving it around. How are you? Good to see you. Thank you for joining me.
Good. Fine, thanks.
I am ready to rock, I think, here. I got everything ready to rock. How you feeling? You got 15, 20 minutes in you?
Sure.
All right. Tone it down, Dave. Bring it down a notch, would you?
Yeah.
If you could take the energy a little lower, Dave, then we'll get started.
Look, you know, to some of us, being this cool comes naturally.
Oh, you know what? I just didn't.
You didn't realize it. It's understandable. Most people don't pick up on that.
Has it been a struggle for you your whole life to be as kind of cool and confident in every situation the way you generally are?
Yeah. I cry a lot.
You know, I think that's the irony, that people don't realize that the Fonz cried, all the cool people, but it's done privately, I would imagine.
It's very dark. It's very dark. It's a big burden.
Well, now that we've got that out of the way, which explains your origin story of sorts, I think. I guess you got to be cool right now, or otherwise you'd lose your mind with everything that's going on between COVID and an imminent war in Russia. Can we start with just asking where you think we're at here on Wednesday, and if we're going day by day to watch? I heard they flew blood supplies in to the Russian troops. That would seem like they're ready to invade Ukraine, Dave.
Well, they're either getting ready or they don't know what they're doing next, but they want to be ready, or Putin is a master negotiator. I don't think it's the last one.
Your piece at the Daily Beast outraged me because any piece that goes back and looks at the actions and the words of the previous administration is a reminder that it got just that crazy. You take a look at many of Biden's current critics, the Biden administration's current critics from that administration, and you take them apart one by one. Is just, first of all, the accusation, the general accusation, what do you make of that President Biden and his administration have been weak on Russia?
Well, I mean, it's preposterous, but it's preposterous on several levels. First of all, the crisis that's currently going on in Ukraine is the fault of one person, Vladimir Putin. He's the one who's created the circumstances. The president of the United States has responded well, and in fact has responded more strongly than his last three predecessors have to Putin doing this kind of thing. Bush had an invasion of Georgia. Obama had the 2014 invasion of Crimea. Trump, of course, had that ongoing, but, he had his own relationship with Russia. And in all those cases, they didn't get the kind of NATO unanimity you've got here, the military response you've got here, the economic response you've got here, troops being placed forward that you've got here, and so forth. So the response is strong. But the chutzpah of the Trump people, going after Biden for being weak on Russia, when, we know the Trump-Russia story, but let's just take this narrow slice of it.
Right. Trump
was impeached for withholding economic military aid to Ukraine. He was impeached for it. Okay. The Trump team wanted to withdraw U.S. forces from Germany. Trump wanted to draw down, first of all, the forces by a third, but later on he wanted to draw them down even further. And of course, Trump actually got on the air and said, the people of Ukraine, I hear they want to be part of Russia.
Right.
He started, doing Russia propaganda. And that's shocking, or at least it would be if we didn't have Tucker Carlson doing Russian propaganda today. In fact, Tucker Carlson's gone so far with his Russian propaganda that Russian television said, maybe Tucker Carlson's gone too far.
Yeah, what's that about? You linked to that. I didn't get to it in your Daily Beast piece. What is that about? Who is saying what?
No, it's Russian television, and they said, maybe this guy's a little over the top.
Why?
And
what's wrong with what's wrong with what he's saying in terms of their interests? He's radicalizing American, I don't know what you call them, conservatives, Republicans, people who watch his show and trust him, into wanting to be more like Russia, to liking Putin.
Well, yeah, except, I guess they're taking issue with, whether what he's saying is going to be perceived as credible by American audiences. But, the point is this, he's not the first person to defend Russia, in this Trump era. Trump did that. Trump's children did that. Trump's allies did that. Trump stood next to Putin in Helsinki and said, no, I trust Putin more than I trust the U.S. intelligence community.
That's the kind of memory I've tried to suppress, and you keep bringing it up. And this article,
I'm sorry to give you Trump flashbacks.
And this article brings up a lot of it. Again, if the premise that anybody that works in the Trump administration, your Pompeos, your Nikki Haley's, are saying, or Republican senators in support of, that Biden is weak, the big point that you're making, although you're so cool, I have to underscore it. Trump was impeached specifically for weakening Ukraine, specifically for that reason, unless Ukraine gave him dirt on Joe Biden. He held back aid and weapons. He literally credibly weakened the country, according to everybody that watches such things, and he was impeached for it. So it's pretty ironic that Mike Pompeo is saying what?
But also, Pompeo said a bunch of things in this op-ed that he wrote for Fox News, in which he said, Biden should get the allies together. Biden should put together clear sanctions. Biden should, move troops forward. Biden should give aid to Ukraine. And the thing is, Biden did all those things. They don't even care about what, they're so sort of untethered from reality that they don't care. You know, they feel that they can go and say anything that they want. But, you know, another way to look at it is, imagine we were in this crisis right now and Trump had been successful and there weren't U.S. forces in Germany and Ukraine had less aid because they wouldn't go along with this kind of thing. And Trump was doing their propaganda. I mean, you know, how radically different would the response be than it has been now?
One of the comments that was made, I think Trump made it, is that Putin invaded Crimea because Barack Obama was weak. Something like that, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, he was okay with it, as you said earlier, because those folks, a lot of them spoke Russian, I guess.
Yeah, well, you know, he I mean, look, where did he get all this stuff? You know, he had conversations with Putin, and Putin said, "Well, here's the real deal."
Right.
And Trump had this thing, you know, he kind of wanted to be like Putin, and why not? You know, what did Trump want to be? The richest guy in the world. Who was Putin? The richest guy in the world. You know, Putin is this kind of, you know, unchallenged authoritarian. Trump wanted to be an unchallenged authoritarian. He had a crush, you know, I mean, he had a real crush on Putin.
His duff is strong, his duff is tough. Very strong and tough. So
now you're giving me flashbacks.
I'm sorry. Let's talk about, I talked to Bill Browder the other day, Dave. Does that impress you?
Yeah, I'm very impressed.
Thank you.
That's super substantive.
Thank you. So Bill's idea is that you should squeeze the oligarchs because you say that Putin is the richest man in the world. On paper, he's not, only because his buddies have all of his money. So he is the richest man in the world, but apparently it's because his friends are holding the cash for him. And so Browder's like, squeeze them. And there's some reporting that says that's either in the works or about to be in the works. Do you agree with that? Will it be effective?
Oh, absolutely. You know, that we've seen this before. You know, there are autocrats who are out there and, you know, you squeeze the country and they don't give a shit. You know, they don't care because, you know, the average person, they don't encounter the average person ever. But, you know, and I'll give you an example. During the war against Milosevic, they were bombing all sorts of things, strategic this and that, and it didn't have any effect. And then they started bombing the factories of Milosevic's friends. And the friends started calling up Milosevic and they said, okay, this is going too far. You've got to figure out a solution here. And that's the same thing here with Putin, you know, squeeze the people around him, make him feel the pain.
Right. And the argument against that, however, is that, you know, I guess scholars, is a scholarly argument because you can look at the sanctions that have been put into effect in different countries in different parts of our history, their history, and it usually doesn't get the country to do what you want. I believe that's a scholarly conclusion.
Well, that's a oversimplification of a scholarly conclusion. It's, you know, the one scholarly conclusion is that unilateral sanctions don't work. But if you are able to actually have enough countries act that a real squeeze is felt, then they can work. And that, you know, they worked in the case of South Africa when that happened. If the United States uses its power to deny access to the international financial system to these Russians, their money becomes illiquid. Or as one group has suggested, you know, the UK government starts claiming the homes of all these oligarchs or kicking the oligarchs' kids out of private schools in the UK. And all of a sudden those kids are at home going, Daddy, what's going on here? You know, that has an effect. And so, you know, between, you know, there are 30 member states of NATO, you know, along with the U.S. So, I mean, of which the U.S. is part. So there's a lot of clout there, and there are a lot of other countries that are willing to cooperate with us.
Who was the U.S. official? Was it the NSA guy yesterday, I think, saying, if Russia invades, we're going to turn off the Nord Stream pipeline. What am I talking about? Is that a thing? Is it effective?
Well, the Nord Stream pipeline is a deal to bring Russian gas into Europe. And there was a lot of pressure that we, get the Europeans not to do this because they would become dependent on Russian gas. They already are to some degree. And the deal was essentially done. There has been some talk of using, us using that as leverage over the Russians because they depend on energy exports. There has been some talk of the Russians using it as leverage over the Europeans because it's wintertime and the Europeans need gas to stay warm. The administration has been ahead of this curve and has been actively working to find other sources of natural gas for Europe in case Russia does this. And I think there's a growing consensus that if Russia goes in, particularly if they go in a big way, that there will be no choice but to shut down Nord Stream. And, net, that's probably a good thing. Having a global energy crisis in the middle of the bout of sort of, modest inflation that we're going through is not a good thing for Biden either, though. So, it's something I think energy sanctions are not their first choice.
What about the concerns surrounding China and role modeling behavior? Like all the world's countries are children, and if we let one get over on us over here, the other one's going to take advantages of us over here, or some kind of weird theory, which I'm not sure applies generally and really should be taken on a case-by-case basis.
Well, it should be taken on a case-by-case basis, but, the U.S. Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, had a conversation with the Chinese foreign minister, and basically he said, I don't know why you're supporting Russia. You talk about how foreign countries shouldn't interfere in other countries' sovereignty and should respect their borders, and the Russians are doing the opposite of this. But I think the more important message that's being sent to China that might consider a similar activity with, say, Taiwan, is that the United States has anticipated the action, moved with its allies to come up with a real strong counter-reaction, and has been an effective leader. I think Putin's calculus was the U.S. is weak. We're politically divided at home. He heard a lot of stuff about Biden, maybe being weak in the wake of Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And NATO was divided. And what he's found is, by his action, he has unified NATO. It may actually get bigger. The Swedes and the Finns are now considering joining NATO. And the U.S. has been a super effective leader, with more meetings with NATO members. And I was talking to some people in Europe than they can ever recall, more coordination than has ever happened before.
So you make those points in this piece at the Daily Beast about just how effective the Biden administration has been. Vis-a-vis is a phrase that we use when talking about foreign policy, I think.
Yeah, no, that's
Russia and Ukraine, Eastern Europe, as well as NATO, and how he's handled all this and the new relationships and conversations he's created, obviously through the State Department, the Defense Department, but yet the criticisms will still continue to come hard and fast from former Trump administration folks and him himself. And I just think that the American public doesn't really. I think that the right cares more about what we're talking about earlier, the same thing Trump does strength and ethno-nationalism, and Putin loves white people. Let's be clear. So it seems that we've really got an important contingency of the public to convince that they're wrong about Vladimir Putin still. What do you think?
I don't know. Yes, that the criticism's going to come, but these people talk crap all the time. They're like, COVID's not a disease, or it was George Soros's idea, or Bill Gates wants to implant little chips in your brain, or Mike Pence had the power to invalidate the election and he was just too chicken to do it. None of that stuff is, it's just not real. They don't believe in history. They don't believe in science. They don't believe in truth. They just want to feel like, their club is right and everybody else is wrong. But you have to acknowledge this. In the last election, Trump lost by 8 million votes. Within the Republican Party, which is generally unified, there is not even unity on that. McConnell said Biden was doing a good job, which is something, right?
Right.
And then, on top of that, this is probably a third of the American populace. The dangerously stupid segment of the U.S. population is really just 1 in 3 of us. And so in the end, they will be loud and they will be difficult, and what they do will be ugly, but they will probably lose out.
And when it comes to this issue, they probably aren't even paying that much attention. Unless Americans are fighting and dying, I'm sure they probably don't care anyway about what Russia does, which is, an argument that a lot of people might make about kind of taking a more isolationist approach. You've talked to everybody on your show, Deep State Radio, and your work, and there's obviously always competing foreign policy analysis within the people who you respect and who you've talked to. Who do you think is making the best point about what America's interests are in this conflict in the region?
Well, look, within the foreign policy community, such as it is, which is to say people who are professionals about foreign policy, whether they're, Republican or independent or Democrats, there's a general consensus that it's a bad idea to let aggressors invade other countries and take over their land. And they cite things like Hitler taking over the Rhineland, Austria, and the Sudetenland before he then did Poland, And they say, well, we probably should learn a lesson from that, and we shouldn't let that happen again. And, that's clearly the position taken by Biden and NATO. But, one of Putin's miscalculations here is, NATO has spent the past 30 years looking for a reason to exist. After the Cold War, they were like, why are we here? Well, they know why they're here now.
Right.
And I talked to a U.S. government official, and I won't say who, but I talked to a U.S. government official, and he pointed out they're about to release the 10-year strategic plan for NATO. And that when they did the last 10-year strategic plan for NATO, they referred to Russia as a strategic partner. And he said, that's probably not going to be the term we use this time around. In other words, Russia has reset the security situation in Europe in precisely the opposite of the way they wanted to do it.
Yeah, a lot has changed, at least even from the last administration, this administration, in terms of what's gone on. Was that government official? You said him, so I know it's a male.
Yeah, Now you narrowed it down.
So it wasn't Ambassador Newland. It wasn't her.
It wasn't Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman.
It wasn't her.
It wasn't U.S. NATO Ambassador Julianne Smith. So you're on your way to figuring out.
Was it a member of Congress, or was it someone who worked in the State Department?
I don't really want to play this game.
All right. Final question then. Say a word about the people of Ukraine, because that's the thing I'm most interested in, and certainly was most inspired by, Dave. Young people in the streets for months and months to push out the autocrats and the Russians and bring in more democracy. What do you want to say about them and what's at stake for them?
Well, it's easy for Americans to forget.
Yeah.
If Russia goes into Ukraine, there aren't going to be U.S. soldiers there. They're going to be Ukrainian soldiers. If Russia starts destroying the Ukrainian military, which will be one of their objectives if they go in, it's not going to be Americans or Europeans dying. It's going to be Ukrainians. The country is going to have huge economic suffering as a result of this. And the Russians may try to move for a political change back to those oligarchs some of whom were very friendly to Russia. So, I think we should remember that this is not theoretical. And one of the larger countries in Europe may see tens of millions of people thrown into real agony as a consequence of this. But Americans can take some comfort from the fact that the U.S. has led the group of countries in the world to try to keep Ukraine safe, to try to prepare for this and to take care of them in the event that this happens. And the reason that this is going to happen, if it happens, is one person,
right?
Vladimir Putin.
Dave, can't thank you enough for your time. Listen to Deep State Radio. Follow Dave on Twitter, DJ Rothkopf. Subscribe to the Daily Beast. Read him over there and everything else that he does and has written and says. Can't thank you enough for your time and your analysis. Really appreciate it. Always cool, Dave Rothkopf.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, he liked it. And I figured his sense of humor out, didn't I? I got you, Dave Rothkopf, and I look forward to the next time because that was great. Really enjoyed it, learned a lot, loved the delivery, and you should check out his show. Check out Deep State Radio, and make sure you tweet him and tell him that you love the way that we danced. Say, I love the way that you danced. Someone will say it on Twitter, won't they? At DJ Rothkopf on Twitter. Definitely let him know that you heard him here on the show so we can get him back and read him at the Daily Beast, of course. Subscribe to the Daily Beast. And now it's time to get to my second guest of the show, who has been subject to quite a bit of news lately as a result of all the horrible things that are happening and they're being said in different places. You heard him earlier here on the show, a clip from The View. Now here he is sitting down with me to talk about his new book and more. The new book is called It Could Happen Here: Why America is Tipping from Hate to the Unthinkable and How We Can Stop It. My guest is Jonathan Greenblatt. He's an entrepreneur, a corporate executive. He's now the 6th National Director and CEO of the Anti-Defamation League, ADL.org. Prior to that, he served in the White House as Special Assistant to President Obama and Director of the Office for Social Innovation and Civic Participation. He's a big deal, and here he is on Stand Up. By the way, on Twitter, also let him know that you heard him at jgreenblatt ADL. Links to all the guests and everything else in the show notes for every day. Let's do it, Jonathan. All right, there he is. Very excited to talk to him. I've told you all about him, and he's always been someone I admired so much for his work that he does really every day. Harder now, I'm guessing, than ever before at the ADL. But most importantly, a new book that you've written, sir. It Could Happen Here. I don't like the title, but I get it. Welcome to the show, and great to see you.
Pete, it is always good to be with you, so thank you very much for having me.
Can we just start by talking about this book, which talks a little bit about your life? Can you tell me about your grandfather and what you learned from him when you put a tape recorder in front of him at one point in your life?
Yeah. So my grandfather was a Jewish man from Germany who survived the Holocaust. You know, he escaped in like the very late 1930s. He'd grown up in a town called Machterborg, which was in East Germany. And then as the Nazis were growing to power, he fled to a city called Danzig, which was deep in Poland. It was an independent city, not Polish, but actually it was ethnically German. He went there, and then when the Nazis invaded Poland, they took the city, and he was able to flee and snuck out with fake papers and made it to America. He lost almost his entire family, right? And my grandfather was interesting because, like many survivors, he was unwilling to talk about what happened. He was unwilling to go back to the country of his birth. He was like deeply, deeply conflicted all through, for as long as I knew him. I mean, he was very, very German, thick accent, German customs and culture and all that, and yet felt deeply, alienated from the only country he ever knew. So he was in America, happy to be here, yet never really wanted to be here. And so when I was in 11th grade, I did a high school project, and he was willing to submit for an interview. And I had one of those little tape recorders, and I taped him. And it was this fascinating conversation where I actually learned all these things I never knew about him. He died shortly after. So when I went to college, I studied abroad in Spain for my junior year. And it was the year that Germany politically reunified, 1990.
Oh, right.
So in 89, the wall fell. And in 90, you could now travel to East Germany without a visa. And he was from East Germany. So I decided for my December break to go back to the town he was from. And I went back to that town with a German-English dictionary, and I had some vision, Pete, that I would meet all the Jews and maybe people who still knew him or whatever. And I opened my book with this story of how I took a train from Berlin to Machterborg. I got off on the platform, and it was like snowy. It was grim. It's like an industrial town. And there were still Soviet soldiers all over the place, even though technically speaking, it was no longer communist. And I found a tourism office, which is sort of a joke because there's no tourism in the place.
Right.
And I basically tried to communicate as best I could. Hey, I'm here. My grandfather is Jewish from this place. I'd like to meet people from the Jewish community. Is there a synagogue I could see or people I could meet? And the first woman I spoke with in the tourism office could not understand what I meant. She got a second lady to whom I said the same thing in my terrible German, who also didn't understand what I meant. And they finally talked to one another. And the older lady came back to me and said, "We don't understand your question. No one has asked this question. There are no Jews here. What do you want?" Like, basically, Pete, they could not even comprehend. They couldn't even understand or fathom what I was talking about. And so for me, I was 19 or I just turned 20 years old at the time. It like hit me like a ton of bricks. I mean, I had this vision and it sort of crashed into the reality. And look, I mean, my grandfather, when he was a young man, I don't think ever could have foreseen a day when his grandson, who would be born in America, he could have never imagined, would go back to his town and the Jews would be entirely erased. There would be nothing left. Nothing. By the way, it was only 50 years later. It wasn't that long. And so in many ways, that's why I wrote the book, because my grandfather never could have guessed it would happen there, and it did. And by the way, Pete, you know my wife's story. My wife is Iranian, right? They're Jews who lived in Iran as far as they ever knew. They never would have guessed before the Islamic Revolution that the only country they ever knew, the only country they had ever known, would one day regard them as an enemy of the state, destroy everything they ever loved, and force them to flee for their lives. I mean, my father-in-law could have never guessed when he was a young man that he would want to have American grandchildren. So if my grandfather from Europe never could have guessed what would happen, and my father-in-law from the Middle East never could have guessed what would happen, I can't afford not to guess.
Right.
I can't afford, you can't afford, we can't afford to take the chance that what we have here, everything that we know and love, could one day be destroyed. And the only way to stop that is to fight for those things.
It's so powerful. And you tell this story at the beginning, the opening of your book. And that was a long time ago. Obviously, when you went to Germany, you've done a lot with your career, even before, obviously, you joined ADL in 2015?
Yes, right.
But my question, and I guess you're the perfect person to ask this question, is given the premise of the book or where it begins and your work, how fast have you seen hatred, bigotry, and violence spread? Because I think what you're saying in that story and with this book is, to some extent, the reason it can happen here is because it happens so quickly and it spread so virally that you don't even realize how deep it has gotten. And I worry that that's what's happening. So how fast and how concerned are you by the speed at which the virus of hatred is spreading?
It's a very good question. I mean, I think, look, hate isn't new, right? Anti-Semitism isn't novel. I mean, these things have been part of the human experience with the annals of time. But the reality is that, and so it's fair to say it's almost like a virus, Pete, to use an analogy.
Yeah.
That's just below the surface. And so we do things, we take precautions to keep these things in check, even to cure ourselves of it, right? From anti-bias education, the kind of cultural representation and or representation in culture and laws, civil rights, like all these things we do as prescriptive means to kind of hold back hate and to prevent the virus from spreading. Because I don't think it's inevitable. I think it is learned and it can be mitigated and it can be actually, I think, eliminated. That being said, some things are different today, Pete, than we've ever seen before.
Right.
Number one, I think you now have people in public life who have actually used hate as a potent political tool. And this isn't just like some random political consultant making, an ugly ad. Right? Or this isn't just a phrase popping up in a speech here or there. This is like, look, our former president, Trump, made animus a central tenet of his political kind of campaign. And we saw this from the day he descended down the escalator in Trump Tower in the summer of 2015 till his last day in office. I mean, the reality is that he saw an element of his political constituency some of the most hateful people on the spectrum.
Right.
And he didn't just allow them to move from the margins to the mainstream. He welcomed them. And we saw it in the ways that he responded to Charlottesville or Capitol Hill. We saw it in how he told Proud Boys to stand back and stand by. We saw it in how he credentialed white supremacists on his campaign for media hits. I mean, again and again and again. Now, I'll be candid. It's not limited to President Trump. We have seen people on the left be ugly and untoward as well. But the issues on the right that he engineered, I think, have brought in a very troubling trend. So people in positions of authority now feel like they can openly disparage minorities and demonize their opponents in ways that I think are definitely different. And it's just become mainstream.
Yeah.
When 70% of the GOP electorate thinks that President Biden wasn't elected, I mean, there's not a scintilla of evidence that supports that conspiracy theory, but conspiracy theories being normalized and hate being weaponized or politicized, these things are problem number one. Number two, social media. Social media has been the accelerant, an accelerant of anti-Semitism and other forms of hate. And it's allowed disinformation and misinformation to be like fed intravenously into the body politic, like drip, 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 every minute of every hour of every day of every week, of every month of every year for the better part of a decade now. And I think that's poisoned our kind of public conversation.
Yeah, Mark Twain, said a lie can travel around the world and back again while the truth is lacing up its boots. He said that, Jonathan, in 1924, before you could tweet out or put up on Facebook with a slick video, a thing that didn't happen, and it would get to someone in Asia in seconds.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's just stunning. Right? How quickly this stuff moves and the unwillingness of the companies to take any responsibility. And I really believe they have not done nearly enough. We've talked about this before. Like Facebook and these other companies are exempt from the law because of a loophole called Section 230. So they just don't have the same liability that traditional media outlets do. And they have exploited that and engineer their algorithms to amplify the worst elements because they drive clicks. Yep. And clicks drive profits. And It's as simple as that.
So you also talk in your new book about responding to and what you learned and what you witnessed in Pittsburgh at the synagogue, Tree of Life Synagogue. Is that right?
Yeah.
In 2018, was it? Yeah. And you went there. You saw that. I mean, when you started at the ADL, I'm guessing you knew the state of play pretty well. But I don't know. Was that kind of a massacre within your? I'm sure it was in your imagination, but I don't know how realistic you thought it would be that you would have to respond as the leader of the ADL to that. What did you learn at that synagogue and from that community in Pittsburgh?
You know, I tell you, I was in the White House when I was in the West Wing when the shooting happened in Newtown, Connecticut. And I think that was it was definitely the worst moment of my public service for 3.5 years. It was just a horrible day.
You worked at the Obama administration. You weren't
That's right. And I worked, on I didn't work on Middle East or Jewish or gun control, or I worked on economic kind of stuff. Policy issues, but that hit everybody like a punch in the nose. It was an awful day, and so that was a moment of how these mass casualty events could affect even the most innocent. I mean, there's nothing more innocent than a kindergarten. And then I remember right before I took this job, there was an incident in January of 2015 where there was a shooting at a kosher supermarket in Paris by an Al-Qaeda sympathizer, which seemed horrible. Or ISIS sympathizer. And then there was the shooting at the Baptist church, the AME Baptist Church in Charleston, South Carolina. That was in June of 2015, where I think 8 or 9 worshipers were killed by Dylan Roof. So these were a couple terrible days. So it was definitely within my imagination that it could happen to people. But I always thought that if something like that happened, it was more likely to happen in Europe, where the Jewish community has faced far more homicidal violence. And that's come typically at the hands of like Islamists or people who explicitly hate Israel from like a radical Islamist frame. I would not have thought, I hadn't imagined that a white supremacist would go into a synagogue, as happened, stoked by these conspiracy theories about like immigration. I've been outspoken vis-a-vis Tucker Carlson, who continues to, he's just so awful, who knowingly continues to launder these terrible kind of white supremacist ideas about George Soros and conspiracies and immigrants. It's just horrible. That one of those conspiracies led this guy to go into the synagogue and kill these people. And showing up in Pittsburgh, and even though I had imagined somewhere, I think that something could happen, I never would have thought it would have happened at home, Pete. I never thought that. But the reality is the community is so incredibly resilient. And, after the shooting in Pittsburgh, after the shooting in Poway, which is a suburb of San Diego that killed a woman, after the attack on we had an attack on a kosher supermarket in Jersey City, New Jersey. 3 people were killed. We had an attack in a rabbi's home in December 19. He was killed. We had this attack on the synagogue in Texas, in a suburb of Dallas, 4 people held hostage. All of these things are stunning to me, and maybe not surprising, but still shocking. The thing that does amaze me is how resilient the Jewish community is. Like, even though you had this hostage thing a week and a half or 2 weeks ago, everybody came to synagogue the following week. Like, the Jews aren't intimidated. And I think what's scary is that I still think you're seeing now synagogues, they're turning into fortresses, metal detectors, armed guards, tons of cameras and locks and things. And I think we need to do that. But I think ultimately we need safety both through security, like creating a hard perimeter, but also through solidarity, which is working with other communities and engaging with them and enrolling them in our issues so we all see our commonality. Because ultimately you can never build a wall high enough, right? That synagogue in Colleyville had security, but the rabbi opened the door to welcome a stranger and to serve him tea.
Right.
So we need to be more dimensional in how we think about safety. There's no silver bullet.
The book is It Could Happen Here, Why America is Tipping from Hate to the Unthinkable and How We Can Stop It. The first part is titled The Pyramid of Hate, and you have 6 chapters kind of articulating that and explaining how it all works. And the second part is titled Dismantling the Pyramid. For your work and your organization's work, you have to do both of those things, identify what causes it and creates it, and then find out ways to defend against it and diffuse it. So let's just spend a little bit of time here at the end talking about how you dismantle the period. We barely scratched the surface in the book or the issue or your work. But I mean, I'm at these board meetings. I'm in an organized group here in my town, and I personally think that that's where the fight. I'm surprised that it's here. I'm surprised that it's so local and that it's somewhat organized. But I feel like, to me, that's the first thing, is to organize locally, know that there probably already is a group of people that have started without you, jump on board. If not, you can be it. How close am I to step 1?
So I just think that's very true. I mean, look,
I'm sorry, but what if I don't do it? What if I don't get involved? I know a lot of people don't want to walk up to the microphone. They don't want to put their name out there. And I want to let them know they don't have to. But there are other things you can do. Maybe you can help us with web design. Maybe you just show up and you wear a T-shirt and show your support. So sorry.
No, I think you're right. Like, look, democracy is a contact sport. And there are different positions you can play. You don't have to be the quarterback. You don't have to be the running back. Literally, you can be on the sidelines, like drafting the plays. But it is a participatory practice. You can't watch democracy from the bleachers, from the cheap seats, eating the popcorn, and think everything will work. And this is literally why I wrote the book. This is what my grandfather and my father-in-law's experience tells me today. I mean, there's that quote by Lenin. It goes something like, there are decades when nothing happens, and there are weeks when decades happen. Like, we can't afford to sit back because this thing could happen very fast. And so how do we stop that? I'll give you 3 kind of tips. First, I think hate, we have to recognize Pete, that hate is a corrosive force that undermines societies and that eats away at the foundations of, again, our like pluralistic democracy. So we have to stop hate. It's like a mold that infects us. You gotta stop hate before it happens. So that means you interrupt intolerance, whether it's in your Facebook feed or at the water cooler or on the Zoom session or even at the dinner table. And you got to call out hate, especially when it comes from someone on your own team. You can't just be like, oh, they're the bad guys on the other side. We all need to have the humility and the honesty to recognize it, even when it's among us. That's number one. I think, and especially being allies to others, not just when it affects us. Number two, I think we got to cancel culture. What I mean by that is, I think my Jewish faith teaches me that like everyone has the power to, admit their errors and repent and be redeemed. So I think we've got to recognize that everyone has a role to play. Someone says the wrong thing, someone does the wrong thing, give them an opportunity to do better. Too often we're just like excommunicating people.
Right.
I think everyone loses in that.
Well said.
And then thirdly, I really deeply want to double down on what you said. We need everybody to be engaged. This requires there's no silver bullet to stop this. We need a whole of society strategy, and it's going to be a fight. Like, you better roll up your sleeves. So whether you want to volunteer for some local organization, whether you want to build the website like you were suggesting, whether you want to show up for that school board meeting, run for the school board. Again, I think sometimes hate is ignorant. Sometimes it is evil. Either way, we have got to confront it. And confronting it requires us to show up. Again, you can't sit back. You got to show up. Like that old Lotto commercial, you got to be in it to win it. So I think we need everybody on the field, Pete, in one way or another.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I keep thinking about that poem quote, Martin Niemöller.
Yeah.
Who was he?
Martin Niemöller was
the quote is. Sorry.
The quote is,
first they came for the communists, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a communist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I didn't speak out because I'm not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me. And that's how I feel like I am, like Pete Dominic and people like me who are, they're white, they're not necessarily religious, they're not gay, I belong to an oppressed group other than the one that I share with you, which is the bald. And that's not really too much of a struggle. You get a hat and you walk through life.
Larry David is a hope for all of us, I think.
Yes.
Larry David and The Rock both give me a degree of But look, like he was a Lutheran pastor in Germany in the 1930s who was like an outspoken critic of the Nazi regime. And I think the power of that quote is the fact that it still rings so true today. White, black, Jewish, non-Jewish, gay, straight, like male, female, however you identify, the fact of the matter is all of us are in this together. Like anti-Semitism isn't a Jewish problem. It's an American problem. Racism isn't a black person's issue. It's all of our issue.
Yes.
And again, the corrosive effect of hate will imperil everyone, irrespective of how we look or to whom we pray or where we're from. So I just think we've all got to, again, realize that we're in this together.
When I'm done with the book, I want to have you back on to talk about it more in detail. I hope everybody will get it. Maybe you can join our live, book chat with a whole bunch of people that have also read the book. And so, folks, go get it and support the ADL. Follow Jonathan on Twitter to find out what's going on. And it's been way too long since you and I have spoken. I'm really excited to talk to you. And I rest easier knowing that you're still running the ADL. So thank you very much.
You're so kind to say that. I always enjoy when we get together, and I really look forward to coming back.
All right, we'll talk soon, man. Thank you.
Okay, be well.
There he goes. He agreed, by the way, to join us as a group. He would love to join the stand-up community at one of our hangouts, and we're doing that tomorrow night. So I will invite him maybe for next week or the week after. How about that? Who would you like to hear on stand-up? What would you like for us to talk about? Maybe you'll be the next guest. I often have listeners on as guests, and I'll be posting some of my recent interviews with those of you I've talked to recently. So those will go up soon. Sorry, I haven't gotten those up yet, but very much looking forward to sharing my interviews with listeners. People have suggested we do that segment, a listener segment. I keep trying to get that into more of a routine, maybe for like weekend programming or something like that, weekend podcast, getting to know other interesting and thoughtful and brilliant and hilarious stand-up community members like you. Maybe that's you. So email me. Tell me more about yourself if I don't know you already. And join us in the Hangouts on Thursday nights, on the Discord, anytime, where this guy often joins us, John Carroll, singing us out. Thanks to Pete Coe, of course, for the intro and the jingle. And I'll talk to you right here tomorrow on Stand Up. Love you. Bye-bye.
Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense and you stand up. Stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up. Stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up. Stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.